Hello, hello, hello. Anybody out there? Good evening and welcome to, hi. Welcome to AP Lit Cram Stream 1, the Lit Cram 1, that's what I'm calling it. We'll be lit cramming until May 13th. Wait for people to roll in. It's not quite 8 p.m. Eastern. Also, welcome to April. I can't believe it's April already. Yeah, go ahead and ask your question. I can definitely find one of those and get that out. A list of literary terms for poetry analysis. Yeah, I mean, I do have many lists, but I can make one that I think is most pertinent, the kinds of things that you're likely to see. A special CRAM list, just for the crammers. That's what we'll call ourselves. The CRAM posse. CRAM squad. I like that. It's not specific to lit, but what do you think? CRAM squad? Lit CRAM squad? CRAM posse? All suggestions welcome. Yes, lit CRAM squad. The CRAM squad's lit. I don't know. I could do a lot of things. I'm definitely an English teacher when it comes to puns, so I can't get enough of that. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's 8:01. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how big the CRAM squad is going to be tonight, but I do want everybody to get as much as possible out of this. And if you have been attending my Monday nights, you know that I often run out of time for what I have planned, and so I don't want to do that to you. So we're going to start. Again, we have, you've bought 10 sessions, and it will be me all 10 sessions. So if you don't already know me, I'm Candace Moore, and I'm here to serve you. So I do want to get a little bit of feedback in a moment about what we need here. And we have some up to the minute updates about the exam. So I'm going to get those out in a moment as well. Just so you know, upcoming Lit Cram 2 as planned right now is poetry. So today's going to be about fiction, more about fiction structures. And then we're going to start poetry at the beginning, explaining figurative language, identifying and describing and explaining. And then we'll go literary argument. And so the plan was originally to go through all 3 essays because we didn't know what we would need. And I think to have a full AP Lit experience, we still want to go through all 3 essays, but we'll see how that works. So tonight, I just want to kind of get some foundation in our Lit Cram just welcome, talk about what my plan is, talk about what your plan is, and then we'll talk about the basics of prose structure. And some of it will feel very basic, but I want to talk about the basics on an AP level. So if you leave tonight feeling like, oh my gosh, I totally knew that, then good. Like that's what I want. But if you also leave thinking, oh, I never really thought about those things in that way, then that's even better. So we'll talk about the basics of prose structure. We'll talk about function, because that's really what we're focused on tonight, is the function of the structure, why those structures would be choices, and then talk about what it's looked like on the exam. And I missed the in parentheses. So what are we going to do here? The plan is to review. So I want to start at the very beginning tonight and just kind of go through 2 semesters of AP Lit, or, you know, however many you've had, 2 semesters of AP Lit once per week. So basically the idea was to get 1 unit kind of covered each night. So that's, you know, really cramming. But I also want to get opportunities to practice as much as we can in the chat, practice discussing, practice analyzing texts, practice defending claims and making and defending claims, and think. I want you to be thinking. After tonight, we will have homework that you kind of want to come prepared a little bit, so that we can get straight into the discussion, so that we don't have to read together every week. But I also am really interested in what you need. I want to be able to respond to your needs. So when you signed up for this CRAM session set, what were you thinking that it would be? What are you hoping to get out of it? And what can I do to make you feel best prepared for the exam? So just take a minute. Those of you who are out there, take a minute and think about what your expectations are. No request is too big at this point. I'll say whether or not that seems doable in 10 weeks or it doesn't, because I think we have a lot of options. Not 10 weeks, but 10 sessions. We have a lot of options and we have a lot of leeway. We have a lot of flexibility, especially knowing that there will be no multiple choice. So we don't have to look at that. Just what do you want from me? Like, what do you want to leave? What do you want to get out of these sessions? Or what have you, even if you're out of school, kind of what have you been missing? What do you think your weaknesses are? Any of that. Throw all of those ideas in the chat. How to format, okay. So when you say analyzing, what do you think is most helpful for you to get opportunities to see me analyze, or for you to get opportunities to analyze yourself, or for us to do it together? Like, would it look, would every session kind of look like a class? I would come in and say, this is how to do it, and then give you time to do it. And everybody else, you know, okay. I've taught 50-minute classes, so that, you know, I can do that. That makes sense. So kind of basic skill sets as opposed to terms and such, I think might be more helpful. Like, these are the skills of writing. So more writing than reading. And so that does mean if we're focused on writing in the sessions, that probably means that you would have to do reading independently. Or we could have some cycles. And don't, you know, everybody else who's out there, you don't have to leave tickets out there alone. Even if you just say what your weaknesses have been in the year, like what's been your struggle, and we can focus on those. Right. Oh, now that's something to think about. I have thought about that, about reading together, having kind of a book club within these sessions. A little bit. Currently reading 1984. Okay. Anybody else currently reading something in class, out of class? 1984 is a good one. It's full of good choices. Okay, well, I'm going to leave that out there. You can, at any point, if you think, oh my goodness, that I hadn't thought of it, but this is a weakness of mine, just go ahead and throw it out there. One of my weaknesses is just throw it in the chat. So we're starting Keeper of Lost Things. Oh, I haven't read that. We're starting with prose, as I said, and here is news headline. There was a college board teacher webinar tonight, and they announced that the AP Lit, absolutely tickets. Tell me what books you've read, and we can go back over those. They announced that the AP Lit FRQ single essay will be prose analysis. Woo! So I just started at the beginning, but it's fortunate because that means that this is what we will zoom in on. We will spend a lot of our time in the next few weeks doing prose analysis. So I'm a little shocked too, to tell you the truth. I really thought it was going to be poetry, but it's not. So they've decided that both Lang and Lit, if any of you are former Langers, Lang and Lit are going to be FRQ too. So that's prose and rhetorical analysis. So, okay. So I think that what happens in most AP Lit classes is that you kind of get your prose analysis skills as you read books. So I do think that one thing that's going to be important over these next few weeks is going to be studying smaller pieces of literature because it's different, you know, so even writing Q3 is different than writing Q2. So I do want to give you shorter pieces that will be more like what you'll see on the exam. And the exam date as of right now is May 13th. So that's just about 5 weeks, I guess. So 5 weeks and some change, I think. So those are the big announcements. You heard it here. Let it be known that Fiveable gives you up to the minute updates about, yeah. So the big announcement is going to come out tomorrow. So we just got, you know, a little bit ahead of the game. So knowing that, let's look at short fiction. So this is probably familiar to you. Yeah. That's, if you got an email, that's probably what it says, probably from Amanda saying, hey, we know this. We know this before some other people. So this is the plot mountain, as I like to call it. And I think this is a good one because it doesn't make the plot seem equal. Like it's not the same going up to the climax as it is coming down. It's a much shorter journey once you've hit the climax to the resolution. Probably all of you have seen this before, and you may have not seen it for years because it is something that starts in much lower grades. It's not necessarily kind of AP rigor analysis, but it is a good way to think about plot. Also, if you're reading something very traditionally structured, like a 5-act play, these things are going to fall in just like this. In a Shakespeare play, 5 acts, you're going to get an act full of exposition, an act where everybody's starting to backstab and be jealous and be evil and be greedy. And then there's going to be some big climax. In a Shakespeare drama, there probably will be some sort of fighting. In a comedy, there's going to be some, you know, somebody's probably dressed in a different way. So there's a woman who's disguised as a man or vice versa. Something crazy is going on, and then there'll be some big blowout, right? That's the climax. We know that falling action comes. So we know that this is how it's going to go. These things are not always equally spaced, obviously. And in a piece of short fiction, like a short story, it's going to be even more condensed. And so if you've ever read like Ernest Hemingway, who says almost nothing, like he gives you so few details that this entire plot mountain happens really quickly. And so in short fiction, you need to pay more attention to what you're being told because there's not a lot of time to flesh out anything. And so we're going to look at a story later that's, you know, flash fiction, if you're familiar with that, under 1,000 words. but it's got all of these pieces in it. And so we want to look at what are the structures of short fiction that allow us to analyze it in the same way that we would analyze a longer piece, but look for what's important. So I wanted to give you this one for reference, but also because when we're talking about these phases of a story, we're also talking about what we expect to find there. And so there are some really important terms that we're going to apply to the different places. So when you're getting exposition is when you meet the narrator, obviously. So you find out if that narrator is first person or third person, which matters because one of the structures of first person is that it's more intimate. And also you immediately are invested more in the narrator than you are in any of the characters because you're seeing it through that narrator's perspective. So that matters. If you see first person, you know that that's going to be the character with which you're going to have the first connection and the deepest connection first. And so it may happen that because of the narrator and what the narrator sees and believes, you may develop an investment in another character, especially, for example, if it's the first person narration of someone falling in love, right? You're going to start to fall in love with the person that they're falling in love with because you're going to see them through their eyes, obviously. So that matters. So you want to, when you open up, you want to know who's telling the story, how are they telling that story? So you get an example, you get exposed, right? Exposition. You get exposed to the narrator's perspective, the narrative style, how that story is being told. You also get pieces of foreshadowing. So as you start to learn the environment, which is really what exposition is, it's exposing you to the specific environment of that story. Then you start to see, obviously, again, the world through the narrator's eyes. And if that's an omniscient narrator, then you're seeing everyone. And so you develop your investment in a different way because you develop your investment in characters more evenly, or you develop your investment in characters who you are given more information about, even though that information is probably objective. But also something that happens is, if you're familiar with the term in medias res, that means it starts in the middle of things. And that guarantees almost that you're going to have flashbacks, because if you start in the middle, you're going to go toward the end, obviously, but you are going to have to get the pieces from the beginning. And so it's really as though the exposition comes closer to the climax or in that middle of the climax. And then you have to go back down to go back up. So these are the kinds of terms that you would use to write about an exposition, that you would write about perspective. And so if you get a piece of short fiction on the exam or in your life, in your career as a literary analyst, if you get a piece of short fiction, it may be very important to be able to identify and then talk about the impact of the narrator's specific perspective and how that allowed the author to develop the conflict. As you go through the narration or the narrative itself, you probably will get flashbacks. This is also where you might get shifts in perspective. So maybe it started off as an omniscient narrator, but then we shift somehow to a first person limited or even a third person limited. We get into the mind of someone more deeply than we were in the other mind. So one example of that is William Faulkner. The Sound and the Fury has multiple, he likes multiple perspectives, and he likes to build very specific but very round characters in multiple perspectives, and then you get to see the same story from all those sides. And so that happens sometimes in movies as well, and so it helps you get a rounder understanding, because no first person narration is going to be completely reliable. So you have to take into consideration, what do I know about this person? What do I learn about the narrator as the narrator tells the story? That's going to help me understand everyone else, and kind of how do I take their perspective on the conflict and shape it into my understanding of what's going on. So, and then another thing that's important to remember is that when you get to the resolution, really, if you're trying to talk about theme with any text, the resolution minus the specifics is going to be the meaning of the work as a whole, pretty much. So for example, if you're reading Romeo and Juliet, right? Romeo and Juliet, at the end, they were willing to die for the love of the other. Their love was so strong, even though they endured obstacles, they push through obstacles for their true love, and that true love transcends death, right? So see how we take the very specific pieces of their fights and suicides and not suicides. We take all of those text specific pieces out, then we have a theme that true love transcends obstacles and even death. So that's something to remember, that if you get to the resolution, whatever happened at the end, if you take the people out, you probably have a theme. So thinking about that, thinking about how things start, right? What do we learn from the middle? What do we learn from the exposition? These are just some famous first lines. And if you look at the first lines, they tell you in that first line or couple lines alone, what kind of where the focus of the text will be. So call me Ishmael. If you've read Moby Dick, which I don't think is a necessity for life, but a lot of people do. But if you've read Moby Dick, then you know that it's very much about that character, and also that it's first person, right? So it establishes right there who you're going to get invested in, who you're going to get involved with, and who's telling the story. Another example is Lolita. Starts off Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, and it is about a very inappropriate relationship that was very passionate. So you know that from the beginning, again, first person. And so, you know, I think things like love stories, when they happen from first person, then that tells you can get even deeper into not only the life of this person, but the heart of this person. And so again, you might see their love the way that they see their love, because they're bringing you into it. Or you might start to hate the narrator because they do a lot of stupid things, or whatever. Some of you are reading Invisible Man. Again, written from the first person. I am an invisible man, which, I mean, is a hook. You know, teachers talk all the time about hooks. Like, that's the ultimate hook, because how are you invisible? What are you going to tell us? And then my favorite at the bottom, Beloved. I didn't even put Beloved, but this is Beloved by Toni Morrison. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with the spite in his own way, but by 1873, Seth and her daughter were its only victims. And so again, that's almost in the middle. So it turns out that that is in the middle, where there are going to be so many flashbacks in this novel that are going to bring us up to date with the baby spite. And so you already get an understanding from those few lines that we're coming in the middle of things, and we're going to have to learn the history in order to move forward. So I said a lot of terms. I just wanted to get some of them on the screen just for your reference. In medias res is in the middle of things. That's a Greek term that literally means in the middle of things, but was used often in more traditional texts. And so it comes in the middle, and then you have to go back and see what the interventions were, and the person telling the story is going to have to flash back to move forward. Unreliable narrators. There are quite a few first-person narrators that are completely unreliable. And sometimes they tell you that they're unreliable, and sometimes they don't. But if you're reading a story where the narrator is young, and so they're not able to take things in the way that an older person would do, they don't see things with a mature eye, then that narrator is going to be reliable. The exception is if it's an adult telling the story of their own childhood, they're going to be more reliable because they're looking back at it. And so they've gained some perspective. Another unreliable narrator is if you are reading a book where someone is often not lucid, they're maybe under the influence very often. Hunter S. Thompson novels are going to be probably unreliable narrators. Anyone who's struggling with some sort of substance or addiction, they're probably not going to be able to see life and the conflicts in the environment very clearly, or maybe over clearly, depending on what influence they're under. So you have to take that into consideration. Like the way that they're describing this, is this actually how this is happening, or is this through the haze of something else? And then if they've shown you that they're dishonest, if you're reading a book written by, narrated by a person who lies all the time out to the people that they're interacting with, such as Holden Caulfield. Catcher in the Rye is a classic that people have a lot of feelings about. But if you've read it, you know that he hates phonies, according to him. Like in his own narration, he says all the time, I hate phonies, hate phonies, hate phonies. Everybody's a phony. But then he tells you also that he lies to people. So you're like, wait a minute, Holden, I don't know if I can believe you, because I see you lying to everyone and you're talking about how much you hate phonies, but you are a phony yourself. And so some of that's going to be part of the conflict, or the internal conflict, about him coming to his own kind of revelation about his own phoniness. So an unreliable narrator matters, because they're going to tell you a story that's not necessarily believable or trustworthy, and that matters. So when you're trying to analyze, it's important to make sure that you acknowledge that that narrator is not a reliable narrator, and that you have had to, as a reader, analyze that narrator as a character, the characterization of the narrator, the choice that the author would make in making that narrator unreliable, and that you have recognized that that's true. And so that you can analyze everything through the lens of that narrator, but also knowing that from the outside, that narrator is not giving you all the information, and that some of the other characterization and conflict that you have analyzed and interpreted had to be done from the outside the narrator's perspective. And so that adds to sophistication, because it means that you were able to determine or distinguish that narrator as unreliable, and you were able to take in other factors and facets and author choices to understand what was actually happening. Point of view matters. Again, first person brings you in a different way. Omniscient means that you get into everyone's brain. Again, these are probably terms that you're accustomed to, but I just want to throw them back out to you because we're starting at the beginning. Also, foreshadowing is going to be a large part of exposition. And the tricky thing about foreshadowing is the point of it is to show you that something's coming, but sometimes you don't realize that was foreshadowing until you see that it's coming, right? Sometimes things are set, the setting, you can predict, but sometimes you're like, oh, that's why the shoe was in the middle of the floor. Oh, yes, of course. So foreshadowing happens all over the place. But I think that the facts that you learn about characters and setting in the exposition are often foreshadowed. They often foreshadow later conflict. Yeah, but it can show up anywhere. And so the thing to remember about the exam, right? Because here we're not just analyzing for analysis' sake. I know that we're all here to get to the exam. The thing to remember about the exam is that prose passage is going to be about a page long. And so it has been before, but it's not likely that it will be a whole story. So they might take a piece from a novel. They might abridge a short story. They might give you an introduction. The good thing is that usually if it's an introduction, they'll say, this is the introduction to a novel blank. And so then you have the expectation of exposition. You know that I'm learning about this in the same way that everyone who read the book was learning about the people and the conflict. And that helps you. Usually, so how do they tell you to analyze it with the theme? Usually the prose passage is not actually going to be about theme. It's going to be about a relationship or a character. So that's something that we're definitely going to look at repeatedly in the next few weeks, is analyzing character, because it's very, very likely that you will be asked to analyze a complex relationship or a complex character, or maybe a character's attitude. That might happen also. And so one thing that I'll do is show you, just kind of dive briefly into the last few the last few years of Q2s, so that you can just kind of see the patterns and predict what you're going to be able to do in your 45 minutes. So yes, in an essay. So the structure will be still 45 minutes. And so you'll get I'm guessing, so that's actually kind of a little bit more than you were allotted if you had 3 essays, but it'll be 45 minutes to read a prose passage and write an essay. And so, so I have a cousin who makes fun of me because I'm an English teacher, and she is like, you know, English teachers are always telling you that there's a reason for everything. You know, it's like she's got all those memes. She used to send me memes all the time about why are the curtains blue? And I use that in my class a lot because there is a reason why the curtains are blue. I promise. I promise there's a reason why the curtains are blue, because authors don't tell you details for nothing. So English teachers are always saying analyze, because there's always something to analyze, I promise. We don't give you books that don't mean anything. We don't give you books where the author is just like, oh, blue's pretty. I'm going to just have, you know, I'm just going to have blue curtains in here. Because if the color of the curtains doesn't matter, then they're not going to tell you the color of the curtains. So, and I stand by that. I stand by that as an English teacher, that authors don't give you details for nothing. So every detail matters. What we need to focus on the exam is whether or not the details matter for what it is you're asked to analyze. So we want to look at details, but we don't want to write about details that don't matter. So maybe the curtains are blue because they represent the ocean that the character will eventually drown in. Maybe that's true. But if you're not asked to write about that character's drowning, then you don't care that the curtains are blue on the exam. So let's read. Yay. So we're going to read this story called The Huntress. And actually, let me give you, I'm going to put it all up on these slides, but I also want to give you a link to the story for yourself. This is an illustration from the story. It's going to be related to the Huntress. And the illustrator has the same last name as the author, so I'm guessing they work together on this. But it's very short. As I said before, it's flash fiction. So we're going to be able to read it very briefly. And then we're going to, as we read these chunks of it, we're going to answer these questions to help you think about analysis and help you analyze for a specific idea in the way that you will be asked to do on the 13th. So I feel like maybe I should let you read it yourself, or should I read it to you? There's the website. Okay, so so you can look at it yourself on the site. You should see the same picture and all that. There's a question real quick. Do we still have to read a book if we're doing a prose analysis? No. So so here's the thing. Fiction analysis, prose analysis is prose analysis. But I do think that because these are CRAM sessions and because our focus here is doing well on the exam, that we won't read a book together, that we won't read a book together here in the CRAM sessions, but in the free streams, we can read a book. Because so there are two ways to look at it. One is that every book has pieces, right, that can be analyzed like a piece of short fiction. So it would help to read a book and then just do close reads of specific passages. Or we could just read a different piece of short fiction every time. I'm going to think about that. Anybody have any votes? Would you rather read multiple short pieces, or would you rather take short passages from a novel? Everybody's so quiet tonight. Okay. 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 So we'll read a novel together. So oh, okay, we're 2-1 here. 2-2. We've got two short passages from a novel and two multiple different passages. Mm-hmm. That's true. It would definitely provide more variety and be more like the exam. All right. I'm going to try to figure out how to maybe mix it up. Maybe we could do a longer short story. Can someone break the, yeah, somebody break the tie. Let's see. We have 7 people in here. So something should win. Okay. So we've got 3 multiple different passages and 2 short passages from a novel. Okay. Well, you know, I am a little bit of a peacemaker. I'm going to try to see how. Okay. Well, we'll take that into consideration. Okay. Back to the Huntress. So I'm going to just give you a few minutes to read these first 2 paragraphs, whether they are on this slide or on, if you went to the link. Regardless, it's the first 2 paragraphs, and then be able to answer these questions. Where does the story begin? However you think that answer works. Where in the story do we start off, and what is the effect of starting there? And then how you would explain the narrative perspective. So go ahead and read the first 2 paragraphs. And then as you get to the answer, drop your answer in the chat. You can read. So Anisha asked, "Can we read? We only read the first 2 paragraphs. You can read the next. You can go on if you would like, but there are more questions." So yes, you can give me a thumbs up, or you can just answer these questions in the chat. So how would you answer the question, where does the story begin? What would you say about where it begins, and why does that matter so far? I mean, even just in these first 2 paragraphs, knowing that the story itself is not a lot of paragraphs. So let's, okay. So those are both answers, right? It begins in a city. What tells you, I mean, it says the city, right? What's going on in the city? I would say yes, Anisha. I think that this is a good example of beginning in the middle, because we know that something has been happening, right? So they're in the middle of some huge situation. What's going on? Right, right, Urina. So something is happening. Some huntress, right? So there's a huntress, and what is the huntress doing? Hunting. Closed like an eye, and think a foreigner and a monster. Okay. So is the Binta, is the narrator the foreigner or the monster? Right. So we have this narrator who, again, somebody said earlier, first person. So we're seeing this situation from the narrator's perspective, and the narrator is a foreigner, which means the narrator is in some way in the situation but outside the situation, because the narrator says, I didn't know better. I didn't know about the thing that I was entering. So again, in the middle of things, there's something going on that the narrator is not aware of in the way that everyone in the society is aware. And so, but we know that it's a regularly structured society, right? Because in the morning, poor children scrub the stains from the roofs, which I think is an interesting detail. Again, why would we need to know that the poor children are scrubbing the stains from the roofs? If the author never tells us anything that we don't need to know, why is it important that the poor children are scrubbing the stains? Yes, my question is in the first paragraph, it says, in the morning, poor children would scrub the stains from the roofs. And my question is, why do you think it's an important detail that the poor children are scrubbing the stains from the roofs? Right? There's something that's, yes, there's something that, yes, right? So something's bad. They're the stains from the monster. And the poor children had been the ones to clean it up. And now, which might mean that the poor people had been dying. But now the rain dark head of the Huntress is on the dome of the embassy. And we know that the embassy is probably not where the poor people are. So the second paragraph, and so a narrative perspective, participant observational perspective, we had first person, all of those are correct, right? So you know that you're getting this story from the perspective of someone inside of it. And so you're going to get as they understand it. And so to know that this character is a foreigner, it means that the character is learning this phenomenon, whatever this monster is. The character is learning this phenomenon and sharing with us as they learn. Okay, so interesting points about setting, that there is an embassy. The city is closing down every night, that it's hot. I closed my eyes in the searching heat in the middle, in the middle of the second paragraph. All over the city, people were taking shelter in their cellars and under the beds. So very interesting. Now, they're not only closing their windows, they are hiding. Once there were two children, and they were the only ones on their block who kept the passion for monsters after they grew up. So of all the kids on the block, this monster ruined monsters, right? Because this was not like exactly, they're expecting the monster. This is not like a Monsters Inc. monster, right? It's a killer. Okay, moving forward. I'm moving forward in the wrong place. The next couple paragraphs, this is continuing to talk about the two kids. And then we have another structural element. So the two things to think about here in these paragraphs are, how is the reader's understanding of the conflict deepened by this flashback? And what is the function of these setting details? So we're thinking more about the setting here, also this flashback and how it impacts the conflict, the development of the conflict. All right. So we have this flashback of the narrator to being told stories by her father. Very good, right? So it compares the fear of the lion to the city's fear of the huntress. But what do the huntress and the lion have in common? The huntress and the kind of father's portrayal of a lion have in common. Right, exactly. So they both, yes, exactly. So this cry is kind of unexpectedly small in both the father's story of the lion and and the huntress or the prowler, right? And so we're changing from huntress to prowler, but that's really the same thing, right? The predator, like a question, all over the city now. So we have this flashback, and so it does bring back this idea of a predator. It's like, this is my previous experience with a predator, but that wasn't a real predator. It was my father, you know, pretending. But it does remind her of the way that this huntress sounds. Very good. So the huntress holds a lot of power and control over the people. Absolutely. So everybody's hiding. All over the city, people were covering their heads. The leaves outside, outside my window shrink and smoke. So everything's kind of cowering from this huntress. And then we have this line: exiles and insomniacs share this feeling that each is the only one. And so we know that the narrator is a foreigner. And so now we get a little more information about the narrator, that maybe the narrator is also in exile. And that the narrator is awake when everybody is hiding from the huntress. So maybe the narrator is also an insomniac. And so to bring those two together is kind of paradoxical. You don't really think about exiles and insomniacs being having things in common, but you also don't think about your father's stories about camel herding having something in common with a killer huntress animal thing that leaves stains on the roof. So it's bringing all these ideas together because we're getting close to if there is a climax, we're getting close to it because the story's almost over. So I just wanted to give you an example of kind of how compact stories can be. You're getting all this information in so few paragraphs, in so few, moments. Okay, so the setting details. So we talked about that also. So those setting details about how people are responding to the huntress, or the threat of the huntress. That's telling us about the environment in which she's living, and that she is exiled from it, but also visiting it, but also not really in it because she's not hiding and sleeping the way everyone else is. All right, so here's the end. All right. So what's distinctive or important about the structure of this story? What structural elements that we talked about earlier, or what do you see? What do you see in terms of the way that the story is told that impacts the story itself? That's a good question. I think so. Is the narrator staying in the embassy or hotel, or is there a hotel in the embassy? Do we think that this is the same night, or maybe the Huntress visits multiple roofs per night? It's in first person, so it tells her own account. So if we began in the middle of things, do we end at the beginning, middle, or end? That sounds like a trick question. But if you can begin in the middle, you can end wherever you want. And so where does it go from the middle? Let me back up if that seems like a huge question to answer. What do we find out about the narrator? Throw wrong answers at me. What happens to the narrator? Does she survive the Huntress? Does she conquer the Huntress? Does she succumb to the Huntress? Because it's 8:59. Um, the Huntress left dark patches wherever she passed. She left a streak. This is the second paragraph on this slide. In the morning, the hotel staff would find me unconscious, gummed to the floor. The proprietor weeping, for nothing like this had ever happened. Oh, here we go. For nothing like this had ever happened in his establishment. Nothing. Had I not read the instructions on the desk. Okay, so everybody's answers just came in. Yay. I think that was my slow internet. So if it starts in the middle, then it started in the middle when she learns about the monster. She's oh, Urena. That's a whole new look at it. She's turning into the creature, and the Huntress is there to bear witness. That's definitely something that you might be able to support. She's a foreigner, and that shows she could have been exiled. It seems as though she might be unhappy with her gender through the mention of a monk and a ballet dancer. Okay. Did she turn crazy? Okay. So all of these things, we know that the Huntress has made basically a stain of the narrator in the way that the Huntress made stains of other people that had to be washed off every night. not on the roof as it has been, but the Huntress came in and gummed her to the floor because the proprietor is like, didn't she read the instructions on the desk? I call the narrator a woman. There's no reason to assume that she is. But the Huntress comes not as a not coming back to feed, which she kind of has done at night anyway, but as a witness. And so that's a really interesting take, Urena, that I didn't even, that wasn't even my interpretation, but that she's kind of taking, maybe that the Huntress transformed her like a zombie kind of thing, right? Like to attack her, it's to transform her, and the Huntress is coming there to see that go. Okay, but the question is about structure. So we have immediate res as a structural element. We have flashbacks as a structural element. We have the narrative perspective as a structural element. All of these impact the way that the story is told. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about structure, right? How do we get the plot pieces? And so, right. So, yes. So bearing witness to a crime, we know that she's unconscious, we know that the narrator is unconscious in the morning. And so that's, the proprietor's like, wait, not in my hotel. We were, because I'm sure everybody else in the hotel was hiding under the bed the way they were supposed to. Right. So the narrator, ignored all the warnings and ended up unconscious and stuck to the floor in the way that the Huntress does as a stain. So structurally, right? Because if we were asked to analyze structure, we would have to talk about those pieces. We would not want to dive too deeply into who the narrator is as a character, as much as we would want to talk about the way that the narrator narrates. And so that's a really important distinction to make, not what we learn about her, but the way that she teaches us about the environment and the story. So we start in the middle and we don't go very far, right? It doesn't seem like this is, months or on end, right? We start in the middle. She comes into the middle. The narrator comes into the middle of a situation, and then kind of after the end, almost, we end because the Huntress it's almost like a new beginning. The Huntress is bearing witness to. So if you had to choose an element, a structural element, and it could be in medias res, it could be narrative perspective, it could be flashback, it could be the chronology and whether or not that's straightforward. If you had to choose one, what would you say the most important structural element is, and where does that play out? So it's 9:03. So now that we know that it's prose analysis we're going to focus on, I know that I said on Monday, for those of you who were in the free stream on Monday, I said I was going to put up a practice prompt, and I decided not to, but I am going to actually put this up as a practice prompt that you're going to just respond to which structural element has the most significant impact. And then you can say, if you'd like to think about theme, what is this story actually discussing? But I would like you to decide one structural element that you think has the most significant impact on the meaning, and 2 examples of that element. So if you have flashback, you need to have 2 pieces of the flash, or that you're calling the whole thing a flashback because we end after she's been attacked, or narrative perspective, or immediate res, or just the conflict. That's a structural element. And so I don't even want you to write a paragraph, just what impact has the most impact, and 2 examples of that. And we will pick right back up and read something new next Thursday, 8 o'clock. Thank you all for participating, attending. Feel free to watch this as many times as you want. It'll be up by tomorrow morning to watch the replay. Please come back Thursday, 8 o'clock. If you have thought of anything that you would like for me to include in our study, then let me know. Other than that, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. I don't know why that said sleeping. I thought that was something that I didn't understand. Good night, everyone.